Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Midnight Spotlight, the home of some dudes who be having thoughts on movies. My name is Cole,
My name's Carlos.
and today we are looking at none other than Ari Aster's modern horror masterpiece, Hereditary.
Yes, and this one has been a long time coming because we've been planning on doing this one since the very beginning of this podcast.
Yeah, we got
A long ass time ago.
honestly, we did the Lighthouse first. That's so crazy because you look at A24's like track record, right? Like The Witch was probably their first major splash, I would say, but Hereditary is where things really took off. That's
Yeah,
like the movie
yeah.
that really catapulted A24 as a studio, I feel like, into maybe not the entire film community, but definitely the horror community.
Yeah, it definitely kind of blew into the stratosphere of what A24 what they eventually would be, but also for Ari Aster establishing him as pretty much kind of a household name. I mean, people
I
know
would
him,
say so. Yeah,
and
he's like,
yeah,
especially after this, he made Midsummer, which was also kind of like a modern cult classic. I'd say
yeah,
it's pretty
yeah,
popular.
and the only thing he had kind of under his belt was The Strange Thing About the Johnsons, which I would recommend watching for yourself because I don't want to spoil it, but it's a pretty fucked up kind of story. Um, but it's
Yeah.
definitely, I think, worth a watch if you're into that weird shit that Ari Aster likes to do, and it's definitely his tone and style. But
Mm.
yeah, I mean, watching that and watching Midsummer, you can definitely tell this is kind of like him really finding a stride in horror and making kind of film. And I think starting off kind of strong, he knocked it out of the park with this one. I
Yeah, I'd have
absolutely
to.
love this movie.
I'd have to agree. It's one of those things that like from the day that I saw it, I got to see this when it came out. I knew like give it like 10, 15 years from now, people are going to look back and think of this as like one of the highlights of the 2010s for horror, which is
Oh yeah.
not an easy feat. It's easy when you're in the moment to say like there's not many good horror movies that have come out. But contemporary views of the times have always changed over time. Like through the 80s, there are a lot of movies that are classics now that weren't then, like John Carpenter's The Thing. That movie was not a hit at the time, but thankfully Hereditary did get a lot of attention, and the rest is history. So I guess before we go on, we'll talk a little bit about the story. We're not going to go into spoilers just yet. We'll let you all know when we do. But it kind of follows a family that's in the midst of a grieving process. They just lost the main character is Annie, played by the amazing Toni Collette in this, which we cannot not say how great she truly is in this. She absolutely steals the show. We'll get into it more in a little bit.
Yeah.
But her mother passes, and there's a lot of strange faces in the funeral crowd that she doesn't recognize. She goes back home. There's weird things going on. Things that, as an audience member, you look at and are weird. In context to the family themselves, they're not as weird, but things slowly start getting weirder and weirder until it eventually reaches its inevitable boiling point, and it's a
Yeah.
absolute experience to watch. As we've said, Toni Collette, amazing actor.
Yeah.
She really did such a great job with this.
Yep. I think with kind of like this movie, essentially, this is more than just kind of like this normal grief where people are like sad or depressed. They're dealing with a lot of emotions, and everybody in the family is kind of dealing with their own feelings of this their grandmother's death, which it wasn't essentially like something people were sad about, but there's definitely a shift in the kind of like the family dynamic that everybody's dealing with their own way. So overall, it's that part is definitely transparent through Toni Collette's performance, as like we've said already like three times already. She steals the show, and for what it's worth, and I mean, she kind of almost carries this movie for the most part, and it does depend a lot on her. So overall,
Yeah.
I think Ari Aster directed her kind of performance very well, and she, of course, acted the hell out of it.
Yeah, she got snubbed. She got snubbed for sure. That was something
Yeah.
that like the horror
Yeah.
community as a whole was so upset about. I remember that. And man,
Yeah.
she deserved some like actual serious critical recognition, but of course, Ever
Yeah,
since they said Silence of the Lambs is a thriller and not a horror movie, they just won't acknowledge it.
yeah, horror in general just isn't looked at in a lens that makes makes critics like love it, but
I think
it's
on that note, though, that's like where this movie kind of deviates a little bit. You know,
yeah,
it's
it's more than a horror movie. It's more
yeah.
than just a horror movie, which I really love. It kind of bends the genre tiny bit because I think it's definitely a family drama as well.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, just like the amount of emotion that's at the core of this movie is it's intense. Like I don't know how else to say it, but it's absolutely intense. Like not only like the pain and agony that this family goes through along the way, but all the stress, all the guilt, everything. It's just like it's so intense, and these characters are able, or the actors are able to like put through it as the characters with some very minor exceptions, which I know Carlos got a lot to say about.
Yeah,
I know he got a lot to say about it.
Yeah, for the most part, there is three family members in this family that are definitely probably, or I guess four family members that are important to the story. But Alex Wolff, who's the other actor in this movie, definitely has a lot to carry on his back, and he does for the most part do his best, but it doesn't come off as the best when watching it. And I'll get more into that in spoilers, but I think there's some aspects to the performance that could have been better or could have been done by a much better actor.
Yeah, there's just it's just awkward. That's like the best way to put it.
Yeah. Overall, I think he was great, but it lends what lends to kind of like his performance is everything around it, to the technical aspects. It looks phenomenal.
It does.
Sounds phenomenal. The music, the soundtrack is fantastic. The special effects are great. The FX and the makeup and all that stuff, and
everything.
Like the story, the writing, the script, it's all fantastic, and it's done super well. Like I can't think of any other I can't think of horror movies that do it just as good, but I think this is one of the best technically done horror movies I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and that's something like we said with this movie. It's got so much going on inside of it that it's one of the few horror movies that I can say for sure that even if you're not interested in horror at all, you can appreciate this movie a lot. Especially like we've seen this movie multiple times at this point.
Yeah.
And it's an experience that sticks with you. And that's something that not a lot of movies can say to their credit. This movie is 5 years old, and I still remember it. I remembered it like it was nothing, I should say that. No, not that. I remember it I remember it very clearly. I remember like the time flew by like nothing. And, it just sticks with you. It's a scary movie. I feel like that's not spoilers. It does seem like there's a mystery to this movie. You're not ever really sure what's going on, and at least on a first viewing, and that lends itself so well to moments that are just they've become iconic too. There are moments in this movie that are going to be echoed down for generations, I'm sure. And it's just some incredible stuff that Ari Aster was able to do to it. And going to everything like you said, it's also meticulously well crafted that it's hard not to notice it. There are a lot of movies where when you think about it, you're like, oh yeah, that was actually pretty cool. But no, this movie, it's like you're noticing it as you're watching it. And that's something that's, it just makes you appreciate it that much more. It's so cool.
Because again, we've watched this a couple times since it's come out, but watching it 2, 3, 4 times, there's so much to this movie that Ari Aster has done so well, because there's so many aspects, so many details and fine print that are within kind of like the confines of the movie itself. There's more than meets the eye, which lends to a lot of like just great viewings. You watch this movie over and over again. There's more to kind of watch or appreciate, and I really love that about this, and I can't praise it enough for that, because I feel like that's one of the coolest aspects, is just watching a movie the first time. You're like, damn, that was great. You're like, wait, there was a mystery behind it. Let me go back and watch again to see if I can notice that. And I think it's funny because you watch, you see it. I feel like this one on Twitter has definitely gained a lot of popularity and or like
Oh,
Instagram and stuff
absolutely.
and like general social media. But I feel like there's some parts of the movie where people kind of like see you're like, oh, did you see this part? And either you're like, yeah, I remember I saw that kind of first time where you're like, oh, I didn't notice that. Let me watch this movie again to notice that.
Yeah.
And then
And that's the
again,
cool part is that you do
yeah,
notice it the second time. And I even had that happen when I watched it this time around, which we'll talk about it a little more when we get to spoilers before we wrap up this little synopsis here. But yeah, it's insane. Like there's a lot of care put into the details, you know, a lot of things hiding in the dark. And in that way, it takes a lot from, I know I've told this to you separately outside, but it takes a lot from, you know, the Japanese horror boom that happened in the late 90s going into the 2000s. And even before that, there were movies from the 40s pioneered by Val Lewton, legendary producer for like the silver screen, made famously Cat People among other movies. But
oh sweet, so Cats the movie, the
no.
Fantastic one?
The James Corden cat. That's a different kind of
Yeah.
horror.
Oh, okay.
That one does rival Hereditary though for scariest movie. But no, it's just like, you know, there are moments where you see something and it can just send chills down your spine, and that's it takes a lot to be able to effectively do that for a wide audience. You know, his fear is so subjective that if your movie is writing off entirely how scary people think it is, you're going to end up running into the problem that something like Paranormal Activity ended up running into, where they feel after the first one that they've seen it all before. And this isn't a knock against Paranormal Activity, but you know, Hereditary is
like
doing something else entirely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think with that was going to be my next question is like, do you think with I've seen a lot of kind of like discussion about this, but Ari Aster tends to borrow a lot from other movies, say like Rosemary's Baby or kind of like The Omen or something like that, with dealing with different certain aspects of this movie. But do you feel like this one borrows too much? Like some horror fans will see it and be like, man, there's too many aspects where I feel like are way too similar to other better quote unquote movies that I've seen, or do you think it stands on its own originality?
I would say no matter what you do, there are always going to be comparisons drawn from other movies because, you know, as Quentin Tarantino once said, well, you know, okay, I shouldn't even phrase it like this because Quentin Tarantino said, great artists steal, right? But at the core of that message is like, we all, you know, anybody who does anything creative is going to end up taking bits and pieces from things that they like. And they're going to, you know, the thing about that is like, that's why we have cliches, right? It's about how you spin it and make it your own and add your own twist to it. I don't think it is too much like anything else. I mean, you can compare any movie to some other movie. There's no movie that you're going to be like, yeah, this thing is not like anything else, because there are going to be through lines somewhere, you know? So I think it's a point that people who get caught up on that might be, I don't want to say they're using it as an excuse, but I don't think it's too ham-fisted, you know? And that goes the same for like things that are going on throughout the movie as well. I don't think there's anything that's put in your face to be like, oh, look at this. You know, there's nothing in this movie that screams, oh, look at this. This is The Omen. This is Rosemary's Baby. It's all comes together to being its own experience. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's most important. I feel like trying to say this is just something else is almost a cop-out. That's my personal opinion. That's my rant for the day. He had to get it out of my system. What can I say? What can I say?
Yeah.
But no,
So
as I was, sound design.
I mean, you mentioned that you really love the sound design when we were talking about it a little bit before this, but I think it adds to the terror. I think this movie is pretty terrifying, and if you're kind of a little baby, then don't watch it. But everybody else, 100%.
It's the only time that I had shown a movie to our friend Bobby, who is featured on many past episodes. He had to look away during the scary scenes. He told me that afterwards. He told me he looked away. Can you believe that?
Yeah.
I was like, what? That's like, he's not even a horror movie guy. So that was like, it's a testament, you know? Like, fear is subjective, whatever, but like, they're so well done, the scares in this movie. And it just keeps on amping up. Like I said, it's such, an emotionally intense movie that when things reach a boiling point, it like meets perfectly with the story to where it just hits this pinnacle, and it's like the top blows off, you know, there's stuff everywhere all over Carlos's face and chest, and it's a crazy thing. It's a crazy thing, but that my point is that the movie is crazy. It's insane, and in a good way though. You know, it's something that people remember. It's something that we remembered very clearly going into this, and it's a reason why we're even talking about it right now. You know, I couldn't tell you many other movies that came out in 2018 that stuck with me, but I remember Hereditary, so props to you, Ari Aster. You look goofy as hell.
Props to Ari Aster, that goofy man.
I wish he looked different.
I mean...
I do.
I mean, with that being said, highly recommend to anybody who has seen it or hasn't seen it, watch it, you know, before we get into spoilers here. I think it deserves a watch without knowing anything about it.
Yeah, it's
or if you know something about it,
the less you know, the better.
Yeah, exactly. The less you know, the better. And then, or if you have watched the movie a while ago and or recently, watch it again. There's no problem with that. I think there's a lot of detail that
some stuff we'll probably even bring up that you might notice this next time around.
Yeah, exactly. So,
do you have anything else you want to say before we go into that?
I mean,
no.
If you're watching non-spoilers, I think I can give it a rating real quick, and then we'll turn back around to explain a little bit more. But I think I give this one a 9 out of 10. Very well done. Some parts that I'm like, it could have been better, but we'll get into that a little bit. What about you?
Yeah, it's I actually give it the same. You know, as I used to have it as 5 out of 5 stars, but it's a movie that I find that I appreciate much more than I actually would say that I love, and that's okay. You know, it's I do love a lot about it, but for me, I'd also give it a 9 out of 10. It's like a mastercraft, right? But it's like you said, there are certain things that just hold it back, and not in any major way. It's just, you know, I wouldn't say it's a perfect movie for me, and that's okay, you know? But what it does accomplish... What it does accomplish is a serious feat, and it's something that does deserve to be seen, even if you're not a horror movie fan, which I wouldn't even doubt if there were non-horror movie fans listening to this podcast, you know? I meant this episode specifically. Because it's so well known. But yes, absolutely give it a watch. And then for those of you who have seen it, for those of you who either don't care or whatever, you know, sticking with us for the ride, we'll go ahead and talk about some spoilers. So, first things first, we'll go over, like, we touched on it a little bit, parallels with the story, right? Like, it opens up, and, like, I'm pretty sure it's the first scene in class. They're talking about Heracles' oracle, and it's an illusion of choice. And that, this is what I noticed this last time that I watched it again. That's, like, such a cool parallel for how this movie really does play out, because throughout, it's almost like a descent into madness movie that's orchestrated by a cult. And that is something that is very cool in concept, but it's executed very, very well, I think. Yeah, and that illusion of control is there.
Yeah, I think throughout the whole movie, it's kind of illustrated that there's this chance that they can fix something, and you know, it's almost like a rug pull, because you think they're trying, like, if they're talking about this hopelessness, and it's like, is it this hopelessness? At first, it seems like this hopelessness to kind of come together as a family, but it turns out it's this hopelessness to actually survive. Because they all... Wait, hold on. Give me 1 second. Oh, sorry. Anyways, as I was saying, the hopelessness of it all, like, it all turns out that all of this, like, trying to fight this cult and trying to be safe and or have a sound, comfortable life is pretty much gone, because they were subject for sacrifice basically since the beginning.
That is true. And especially as it goes on, you know, you hit even more iconic moments. Like, the grandma dying is really the least of it, you know? Like, as it goes on, you have the desecration of her tomb, which is very suspicious, you know, as it is days after the funeral. And not only that, probably the most iconic scene in this movie, the decapitation. We can't not talk about the decapitation scene. And like, what a build up to it is too, you know? It's like, it's not so in your face that it's like nut allergy, peanuts in the cake, she gonna get got, you know? It's not like that, but it's shocking even when it happens.
Yeah, and I think, like, from the very beginning, the first time I watched it, that scene was, it came out of nowhere. I had no idea she's gonna get her fucking head knocked off like that. And it's pretty brutal. You can hear everything and like just that whole scene, and then eventually you do see the head of what was she, like maybe like 9 or 10. She was
Yeah,
like a very young girl.
something like
Usually you
that.
don't see that kind of like
Oh yeah,
child
kids are
violence where
usually
it's like,
opted out from the violence.
yeah, but this one's like, yeah, we're gonna kill her, we're gonna knock her head off, and we're gonna show her fucking head being eaten by ants and shit. And I was
Yeah,
like, oh,
and like you said,
fuck, man,
it's a
this is
gut
brutal.
punch. It's a
Yeah,
gut punch
and
because
then
even like the character, the that Alex Wolff plays, he's in shock, because he doesn't
yeah,
even know what to do. He can't even bring himself to speak. He can't even like bring himself to actually look back and make sure what happened because he just can't even believe it. And that's
yeah,
like, I don't know, in a way that's a great summation of things just spiraling even further out of control. Because it's, as the movie goes on, like right before that, you see the emblem, right? You see the emblem on
yep,
the pole.
yeah,
So it's, in this emblem, of course, being that of the cults, it's like they're behind the whole thing.
yeah. And I think I don't know if we already said this before, but this is essentially a cult movie. This is
Yeah.
from the very beginning. It is established, if you kind of already know what's going on, but it's pretty much established later on in the movie that something is going on, and they're being controlled by people and or a more higher power being
Yeah.
that is controlling this cult. But
Yeah, which is
anyways,
an
with that, I
interesting
mean,
point.
yeah, going back to off that tangent, the performance around that scene, I think, is probably my favorite part in the whole movie because it's so brutal, and not in the way of like blood and gore, but in the way of like watching this mother kind of like scream and be sad
Oh,
about.
absolutely. She's wailing in agony on the floor,
Yeah,
screaming about how she
and,
wants to die and all of that. No, it's
mhm.
brutal to watch. And that's like props to Toni Collette. You can feel what she is feeling. Her character is feeling right then and there.
Yeah. But it's something that Ari Aster knows how to do like super well. I mean, just watching uh Midsummer and watching her performance. I know this is a spoiler for that movie, but essentially the very beginning, the main character deals with a horrific kind of like death or of her family, and he's able to get this performance that is so fucking shocking and terrifying. It's fantastic. It's not fantastic, but it's like in fantastic
The
in the way like
performance. Yeah.
he gets this
The performance is
damn good performance
fantastic.
out of these people.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I
Let
think
us know if you want to do Midsummer, by the way.
we will do Midsummer inevitably, and but overall, I think those are definitely my favorite scenes of like absolute agony from this mother, and I mean less so from the dad. I think his performance, I don't think they gave him too much to work with, but I think what he had to work with is he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, he is good. He's his character type in this. He's just the guy trying to keep his family together. He's the one who is the most skeptical about everything supernatural that seems to be going on. And he even at some point is saying to Annie, the character, he's just trying to protect his son at that point, because throughout the movie, and this is where I meant that it's like a little bit ambiguous at first. You're not really sure if it is something supernatural or if there is more to it than that, because there are hints dropped throughout. And eventually you see it all come up to the dad emailing this, I'm guessing it's a psychiatrist. It's some doctor who he's talking about how he thinks she's having another episode of I want to say it's schizophrenia. It's some mental illness that she has had or struggled with in the past. And I thought that made it super interesting because at that point you're like, has any of this been real? But it all plays into like how the cult has manipulated everything, to be able to have it viewed like that. And yeah, he's just a guy who's trying to get everything together. He wants to be supportive of his family, but it's just very tough on him too.
Yeah,
so in that way, like
actually,
he does great.
Yeah, I think that actually adds a lot to even the name of the movie, Hereditary, because essentially the schizophrenia like that she's experiencing, I think her mom has experienced that where she was dealing with that. She was like, she wasn't entirely sure if she was sad about her mom because essentially she was dealing with somebody who was essentially struggling with mental illness. It seemed like So just the fact that like her mom's experiencing it and now she's gonna experience that, that essentially, that's the name Hereditary.
Yeah, no,
This
that's
might have been, but it actually turns out that the Hereditary means, or that name stems from the fact that they inherited this sacrifice for the family,
yeah.
of her family, because essentially the next of kin, or the next, what was the next boy they were looking for, would essentially become this
This demonic
king of
entity.
hell.
Yeah,
Yeah.
which is a very interesting choice of demon to use. It's a very unconventional choice. The demon's name being Paimon. They say it in the movie multiple times. Um, it's weird because like that's not a demon with a whole lot of biblical credit or anything like that.
Yeah.
Even though he's a high-ranking demon, it's not really one that you would like. If you take any given person and give them like a list of names and backgrounds on demonology, they would not choose Paimon. But in that way, it's really cool because it's kind of like its own little self-contained bubble, which I think, if you look at the movie as a whole, that's exactly what the cult wanted, is to get this family into their own bubble so that they were completely trapped, and that illusion of choice slowly crumbles and falls back onto them, which arguably makes it even sadder. That they really could not do anything. And there's even a story when you see Annie going to a support group after we talked about like the famous decapitation scene, which is her daughter. She's talking to these people about how at some point she had woken up sleepwalking and she had covered her and both her children in a can of paint thinner and only woke up by striking the match. And in that moment, she comes to. But it made me wonder, watching it this time around, I never noticed it before. It did. It made me wonder, was there some kind of divine intervention trying to, like, save them from whatever terrible fate they ended up succumbing to? And in that moment, it would have been, like, cruel, but it wouldn't have been worse.
It would have given a more merciful, quote unquote, death, I think.
Yeah.
Because
and that was just something crazy.
Yeah, I don't think it treated God as like this, or gods. I don't know if it really talked about God, but it didn't really treat him like any higher being wanted to actually help them, but instead they had their own way of giving them what they either need or what they want. Essentially, Paimon was going to give them riches, but I don't think it was going to be like they were going to be super rich, but they were just going to have good fortune. I think that's all that cult was kind of really aiming for. But I think it all worked really well. It's very, there's not like a big world ending kind of like consequence by the end of it. It's very much like, we just want to be more successful, and this is how it has to be done. We're gonna have to sacrifice the whole family. I think,
and it should be said, when it gets up to that point, there is a definitive through line throughout the movie of like this weird supernatural stuff happening. It starts off with, I already said about how this movie takes a lot from like Japanese horror, and even going back to Val Lewton stuff, you see the figure in the dark just smiling, and turn on the light, it's gone. And that's how it starts, right? Like that's the first, I think, real instance of the paranormal like being suggested.
Dude,
and it goes on throughout.
Freaky.
It was though, right?
I forgot about that scare. That scene with the mom was so fucking freaky.
It just gives you chills, like when you see it. And the more it goes on, you end up, Annie meets this other character, Joan, through the support group, who seemingly just randomly happened to be there at first, and she gets her to try out these seances and opens her up slowly to like letting in more like spirituality.
It was almost like a con, basically, to get her to kind of like in line for this kind of sacrifice of the family, but to kind of like follow these kind of rituals. But it worked. It worked, and they were smart, and the cult was very intelligent and very subtle in their plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
But even that, I mean, essentially, I think they try to establish this was some kind of like higher being kind of in charge the whole time. Because I mean, from the very beginning, there were shots of course, one of the more interesting aspects of the mom character is that she loves to create small dollhouses. And
I don't really know what else you would call it, but it's definitely like miniature sets almost.
Like miniature sets of like her own life and how she experiences it. So oftentimes it was like certain almost traumatic parts of her life she likes to recreate in a dollhouse, like miniature kind of like looking place to kind of like just, I don't know. It's the way she dealt with grief. I'm assuming, but
Yeah,
essentially
and that trauma
some of
definitely
the
did show up in her
yeah, and
work.
some of the shots actually are made it look like you're looking at miniature
Yeah, it's
city or
voyeuristic.
miniature. Yeah, I don't. What does that mean? What the fuck does
It
that
just
mean?
means that like you're an outside force essentially looking in. Like it
Oh
breaks,
yeah, there you
it
go.
quite literally breaks through the set, where it just crosses over from wall to
Yeah,
wall. It's like room to room, the wall is just a thin barrier. And it's like
yeah,
you're looking in on their lives the same way that she's looking in on these dollhouses that she's creating. And the irony of both of it is that there's something higher in control and the other one thinks it would be in control, right? Like obviously Annie is in
hmm
control of what she's working on, but in that same way, the cult is working on them. And
yeah,
that
yeah,
of course, being the higher power and Payman being involved later and later towards the end, which,
yeah.
as I was saying, you get through to the moments where like they're trying to conjure up the dead spirit of, the little girl
Mhm.
and the freaky looking little, no, I'm kidding. But,
No,
it's like that's a creepy scene too. That's kind of like I
yeah,
feel like the first time the rest of the family is starting to believe there could be something else going on. And that all goes up to even Alex Wolff's character basically becoming the primary target and becoming possessed and like slamming
yeah.
his own face down on the desk. Like, man, oh, it makes you feel for the characters because it's like, how could anybody deal with that well,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so, talking about Alex Wolf, I think, in my opinion, he was the worst part of this movie, and that doesn't, it's not really saying much because essentially, I think all the aspects are great. I think he was definitely above average, but I feel like he was definitely the weakest part of this movie. His performance,
Yeah.
essentially, when they started putting a lot more on him. When he pretty much had the target on his back, I feel like they put a lot of the movie and his kind of like emotional state was basically a huge chunk of this movie, other
Yeah,
than
I would
maybe like
agree
Tony
with
Collette.
that.
But
I would agree with that.
what do you think? What do you think of his performance? I don't know.
I
I feel
think
like he
and
definitely struggled to carry
He
that.
cries weird. Like I told you that before. Like, I don't know how else to say it. The dude just sounds
Yeah,
weird when he cries, and I think in that way it kind of like takes you out of it a little bit.
yeah,
But there are
yeah. I
some
think
cool parallels like that he's given. Sorry, go ahead and say what you're gonna say.
no, I was gonna say he tries a little too hard when he cries, and I feel like it comes
Yeah,
off
it's
like
weird.
this like weird performance, like this. When you see drama performances of
Yeah,
in like
it's like
high
it
school or
screams
something like that, where
high
you
school
want,
drama club. Yeah, the bad side
yeah,
of
where you
that.
want, they want to see like if somebody wants to really get emotion and they want to like they're super sad about losing, let's say like losing their mom, like oh mommy, and like they're like terrified, like mommy, like that's I don't think
Yeah,
that's how people would react. I think they're not going to turn
it
into a baby or
makes you
like a
cringe a
small
little bit.
child. Yeah, I'm like,
Yeah.
it could have been better, but
I will say, like, his character, though, has some cool parallels to the rest of the story. Like, I feel like his place in
yeah,
the story
oh yeah,
is absolutely vital. And, even there's, like, cool parts where you hear Annie talking, I believe it's in the support group, about how her brother committed suicide because her mom, the grandma in the beginning who died, was trying to put people into him. And nobody
hmm
believed him. And the same thing ends up happening to her own son. And it's
hmm
like, it's just cyclical, that of course, going back to the name Hereditary,
yeah, and that
it's
also
crazy like
adds
that.
to the mystery of it all throughout the movie because you think, oh, is this schizophrenia? Is it hereditary?
Yeah.
Using the title again.
Yeah.
Um, but is this kind of schizophrenia? Is this what's causing Tony Collette's character Annie to kind of like lose her mind or kind of like almost turn her back, not turn her back on her family, but almost like break her family apart because of how she's kind of reacting to everything and how everything is getting really, really tough for her, especially around
Yeah.
this time.
And of course, as the movie
But
goes on, you end up seeing more and more how it is it is something that like is far beyond the understanding of most people. It's like just the
oh yeah,
supernatural, right? And it all
yeah,
reaches its head with that final scene. I feel like it really truly begins when the father catches on fire, trying to
oh
burn
yeah,
the book.
yeah.
And
When
then
she
from
gets
that
to
point
that,
on, it's just like spiraling straight down.
yeah. Oh, and I must say, I do love the use of those lights to kind of like show that somebody's getting possessed, or there's
Oh yeah,
like
it's
to
like
direct almost like a spirit going through, or like
yeah,
some kind of like higher being, just like almost moving or transferring into something. That's super fucking cool. I
yeah. No, it
love that
really
part
is,
about
and
it.
it's unique. Like I've never seen
Yeah,
that
exactly.
anywhere else.
Yeah,
That's
I
a
don't
really
think. Yeah, I don't
because
think
it
it's seen
shows you
since.
exactly what you need to see, but it's like it's not too much. You know, it's something that's so
Yeah.
small that it, and not to say that it doesn't draw attention to it, because absolutely it does, but it's
Mhm.
something that's like you can understand why other people would miss it. You know, it's not like there are
Yeah.
reasons why not everybody is like, oh, what's going on? What is that? And I
Yeah.
think that's
It's
a super cool
mysterious.
part of it. It kind of grounds the movie
Yeah.
more in that way.
Yeah, exactly. I don't think it ever goes too over the top, and I think with those kind of like more subtle changes to what could have been essentially an over the top kind of movie with like all these cults and like all, maybe they could have done like chants and or like a actual like higher being with
Black Mass kind
CGI
of
coming
thing.
in. Yeah, but essentially it's like it's subtle. Like yeah, they're to the point where they were basically nothing by the end of it. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, it's not even basically. Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. You know, it goes on immediately after that. You have I already brought it up how Alex Wolff's character ends up like slamming his head on the desk when he wakes up. When he finally comes to from getting back home, you know, the house is dark. At this point, the father has been burnt to a crisp. He can't find his mother, and he wakes up. And I know you said you noticed it this time. You said you noticed it this time. You see in the top left corner, just barely more visible than the darkness surrounding it, right? That's darkening that corner. You can see Tony Collette in like some freakish position up in the top corner of the wall.
Yeah,
And
yep.
it's creepy.
Right when he wakes up. That was truly like there's these scenes where like you can make out something, and it's not like I think they do this a lot in Insidious, where it's like something's there and then they turn on the light and it turns out there's nothing there or something like that. But I think they do this very well as well, where they're kind of like in a shadowed part of the room where there's some light where you can make out something relatively well, and you can definitely tell there's something there and somebody. But as soon as they turn on the light and or like they turn to look, nothing is there anymore. And I think with that part, what I fucking loved was just the way she kind of like floated out of the room after
Yeah.
like he had woken up and he went to look, and then she kind of like crawled out almost like a fucking spider. It looked,
No, it
looked
is. It's weird.
but it worked. It worked.
It's
really
surreal.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the rest of the movie is just like, at that point, it's absolute chaos. You know, you get to see some dude from the beginning. He's all, I mean, not much to see some places, but, you know,
Whoa.
he's standing
Yeah.
there naked in the hallway,
Standing
or
there
just staring at
butt-ass
him,
naked.
smiling.
Yep.
And yeah, that's just like, you know, at that point, like, that's probably the scariest part in the movie to me, I think, is when right after that, you have Alex Wolff's character running up to the attic, because that's the only available spot at that point. You know, it was already opened up. Then, of course, that's where like the beheaded grandma's corpse was at the entire time in the movie, which was only vaguely discussed about. You know, it's like, oh, there's some weird smell in the house here and there.
Yeah. And that subtlety of that whole kind of like almost like B plot of the movie, where it's been hinted at where like, oh, the body's missing, oh, there's a weird smell in this house, what the fuck's going on, and eventually seeing it was like super cool. Again, adds to the fucking detail of the movie, which I loved.
Yeah, and it you know, like that during that climax, it goes he's in the attic, and you just have her banging her head on the wall like frantically, like of course it's inhumanly fast, and that part's freaky, you know what I mean? There's no other way to say it. It's a freaky moment, and from then on it's just the cult finally succeeding. And there are moments in this movie which I know I told you about this before we started, but there are moments in this where it feels like it's a little bit drawn on, a little too long. Like the camera is just held on moments of horror for a little bit too long. Not in the moment that I was talking about with her banging against the wall, but like right after that, she gets like this really thin like steel wire and starts sawing off her own head, which is brutal, right? But you know, I think it could have even been more effective. And I think that's just some parts about this movie, even with the performance, like you said, it's just, there are very little things that could have been more effective. And of course you have her sawing off her own head, and it's still brutal though, you know, it's all in service to that climax. And eventually you just see all these other naked white people
Yeah, just
running
chilling.
all over the place. And, you
Yeah.
know, this the cult finally succeeding in what they set out to do. And that's where the illusion of choice finally falls flat. And you realize that they were in control the whole time, regardless of what these characters tried to do. No matter what actions they tried to take, it all ended the same way.
Hmm. Yeah, so I mean, overall, it's this movie is absolutely enjoyable. There's so much to enjoy, but there's also so much to notice. There's so much fucking detail everywhere. And we can go on and on about all the details and all like the aspects of it. But I think it's better if like if you're listening to kind of go out there, watch the movie and see for yourself if like you've already seen it, look at all the finer details that you think you might have missed. Look for the details we're talking about. Go online, watch the fucking hour-long video essays
Yeah,
of this fucking movie to like dissect and
analysis. Yeah.
analyze all this shit. But there's so much to this movie which I can't appreciate enough, and I think it really comes through in his other movies. You know, watching Midsummer again, a bunch of detail, and I don't want to compare that movie to this one because I feel like they're two almost entirely different movies, entirely different horror genres that they're kind of like playing with. But I think they're both done with a lot of care, and I think Ari Aster has a really bright future ahead of him. But not maybe not with women because he's kind of a goofy looking guy. But
Yeah, okay. Hey, that is
yeah,
true. I'm glad somebody said it, right? No, I'm kidding. But
no, but
okay, you know
yeah,
he does. He looks goofy as shit. Like, what else is there to say? He does.
yeah.
I
What
don't know
else
why
is
he
there to
looks
say?
that way. But no, it is like you said. He's somebody to keep an eye on, and I think that no matter how you feel about the movie, I know some people could maybe view it as maybe a little unsatisfying if you're not really looking at it from an angle of like a cult's overall perspective. Like it's a movie that definitely has its scary moments, but it's not a movie that's going to try and be like, you know, the Insidious sequels or the Conjuring, where it's just going to be like jump scare, jump scare, jump scare, jump scare.
Yeah,
It
yeah,
takes its time, and but it also respects the viewers. I feel like, you know, it's not going to test your patience, but it will set things up so that it can really do what it wants to, and I think it
yeah,
does that very well.
yeah. It won't cheap out on scares. It won't cheap out on um, conclusions to stories. I think it sticks the landing really well because I think a lot of movies like this, it can get too over the top or just be totally underwhelming. But I think this hits just the right spot where you're like, that was a satisfying ending,
Yeah,
and
I would agree with
it's a
that.
good reason to watch it. Go back and watch it. If not for that, then go back and rewatch it for kind of like everything leading up to it. Not only like the subtle detail, but like the music is super fun to listen to. The cinematography is really fun to watch, and of course the performances, which Tony Collette again snubbed. Oscars, you fucking suck, but oh well.
Yeah,
What are you gonna do?
what can you do?
Yeah,
Reform, I guess, right?
yeah.
All out assault. I don't know. Angry worded letters. Okay. But yeah, no, I think that is pretty much everything about it. I think that ending it does so well with like the pinnacle of what that cult has been able to achieve, where you get to see like two headless bodies bowing to a demon that has taken on human form, because they succeed at the end of the day. The cult succeeds. They did exactly what they wanted to do. They brought a demon into a human body that was requested, and in
So
that way,
yeah,
it's even
yeah,
sadder because of it.
yeah. GG's. They took the dub. Unfortunately,
Yeah,
they while the family got took the L. Sad
yeah.
day, but
Hey, that's really what it comes down to.
that really what it comes down to in this day and age.
But yeah, I think that'll pretty much do it then, huh?
Yeah, I think that's all my kind of like thoughts on it. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
bunch of details that we can try to go back and see, but again, watch it for yourself.
Yeah, there's a
Good.
lot that I feel like you
It's a
can get
good.
out of it, even without us
Yeah,
having bringing it up.
yeah, and it's definitely a good movie for Halloween, which is
Yeah, that is
as of
true.
recording, which is Halloween season, and hopefully we can get this out relatively soon so you can watch it with
Hmm.
all your Halloween viewings. But yeah, I mean that's all my thoughts. I mean, 9 out of 10, I think is fair. Like I said, there's nothing I can do nothing but appreciate it. I think, like I've talked about before, there's some aspects to it that are just like could have been a lot stronger, but they just weren't, and I don't think it's Ari Aster's fault, but I think it's all Alex Bull's fault. No, I'm just kidding. But I think it didn't work out as well as it could have. But it's still, everything else is phenomenally done. So much fucking detail. But yeah, 9 out of 10.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Go watch it. It's an
You'll watch
amazing
it.
movie. Go see what all the hype's about.
Yeah,
Form your own
exactly.
opinion. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. First off,
Yeah, thank you for listening.
we do got more coming
Yeah.
up along the way. It's
Yeah,
good to be
and-
back.
Yeah, I mean, with the ending of that comes the next announcement of the next movie we'll be reviewing. And Cole, do you want to go and take that away?
All right, we are going to be doing the controversial yet very, very unique Rob Zombie's Halloween and Halloween 2 combined into one episode.
Yeah.
And that'll be a blast. It's a movie that I've seen both those multiple times before. I know you've seen the first one,
I've seen
but
the
not
first
the second.
Halloween, yeah. Not the second. So I'm excited.
I very
I'm
much
excited.
look forward to talking about those.
Yeah, so if you're excited for some trailer trash and Rob
Screaming,
Zombie-ism,
lots of screaming,
lots of screaming,
yelling,
and
trash,
dramatic characters of white trash. Yeah,
brutality.
We'll be reviewing that then next time on the Midnight Spotlight, where we're in the Midnight Zone. So
Yeah, that
if you
is
want to
true.
find us, please get us out because we're fucking stuck here. And
It has
tired of
been
this.
it's been a long time. Let's just say there's a reason it took so long. It's the reason it took so long to get back
I
to
know.
doing it. But we're
Yeah.
back, baby. We are back. Thank you all so much for watching. Whether you're listening
Yeah.
to it or you're watching us on YouTube, thank you all so
Yeah.
much.
Thank you, and I hope you folks have a good rest of your night.